I'll be speaking to Andy Berman, who will talk to us from a suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota. He's just been expelled from the Veterans for Peace because of his support for Ukrainians and Syrians. Berman was in the U.S. Army from 1971 to 1973, and he's a retired telecommunications engineer for Bell Labs and a longtime peace and justice activist. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Let's first talk about your military service. How did you get into the Army?
Well, my story is somewhat unique. I grew up in New York City. I got involved in political activity, I think, starting with the Cuban Missile Crisis, when I went to a demonstration outside the United Nations, support of Cuba and opposing the U.S. aggression against Cuba. Since then, I have been politically active in a fair number of things. I was very active in Students for a Democratic Society in New York City at Queens College when I was a student there. And later, I joined the United States Peace Corps. I went off to Togo, West Africa, where I taught mathematics and did smallpox inoculation. When I came back, I was in Togo, West Africa, in 1968, which of course was a crucial year for the anti-war movement and for around the world. That was the year of the assassination of Dr. King, of Bobby Kennedy, of the uprising in Chicago, the police riot in Chicago, the Czechoslovakia invasion. And here I was in Togo, and I was kind of confused. I was very happy to be there. I enjoyed the work teaching Togolese. It was a wonderful experience, but I kind of felt I was missing something. So when I came back to the States in 1969, I plunged very strongly into anti-war work. Was, as anyone who was active in that era knows, a lot of factionalism, a lot of disagreements about the best way to end the war. I remember, soon after I came back from Africa, I joined a work brigade that went down to Cuba to cut sugarcane in support of the 1970 harvest there in a group called the Venceremos Brigade. One of the things that happened there was that after we cut sugarcane 8 hours a day, there would be social and political meetings in the evening. And every left tendency in the United States was there, cutting sugarcane and telling their view of the best way to end the war, their political outlook, and so on. It was a time when some ultra-left factionalism called the Weathermen were predominant, and that was a bit of a turnoff for me, but the folks who made a lot of sense was a small group from the Oleo Strut. The Oleo Strut was a coffee shop outside Fort Hood, Texas, that gave an area where GIs from the base could come, hear anti-war stories, watch films, have discussions, listen to music, relax in a very supportive atmosphere.
Say the name of that place again.
The Oleo Strut. The Oleo Strut is a piece of equipment that goes on a helicopter. It's like the Strut's car, but for some reason it's called the Oleo Strut, so they named the coffee shop after that.
I get it.
There were coffee shops outside the major U.S. Army bases during that era. In any case, what they were saying was that the best way to stop what was going on most significantly in the anti-war movement was the resistance of GIs in the military. And there were cases of GIs refusing to go to Vietnam, GIs refusing in Vietnam to go out on patrols, and millions of little efforts of resistance in one way or another. And their story was, this is the place to be. You should go to a coffee shop, or if you're eligible, join the Army. And the message of the anti-war movement from within. Well, at that time, I did go to a demonstration at Fort Dix, New Jersey, with an anti-war group, and we got onto the base with our banners, or anti-war banners, and we were immediately attacked by MPs, military police, with tear gas driving us off the base. And in the panic of being tear gassed and dripping and frightened, and what struck me the most was, hey, we've got to get those guys on our side. Does it make sense to join them? Does it make sense to voluntarily enlist in the US Army? Well, I had done draft resistance, and I was a 4F in my draft classification at this point. But in any case, I took my draft physical in New York, and later I was in Chicago, and I said, okay, if you're going to do it, do it. I walked into the recruitment center in Chicago, and I raised my right arm, and I said, I want to enlist in the United States Army. And I did. In the beginning of I enlisted at the end of 1970. And I did basic training, and I went to for advanced training, and then I was sent to North Carolina, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. There, Jane Fonda and David Sutherland and Holly Near had come through very recently doing a cabaret show for the GIs. It was enormously successful. And so there was a GI movement already there when I landed, when I first arrived at Fort Bragg. And we did things. We passed out literature. We wrote an anti-war newspaper called the Bragg Briefs. We held a demonstration outside the base, out of uniform. And it was absolutely thrilling. And then finally, orders to go overseas came. Any of the guys I had trained with went to Vietnam. For some reason, the luck of the draw, or maybe they were on to me, I don't know, they sent me to Germany. So I spent a year in Germany. Now, in Germany, it also was a this is 1972, very conducive to, the GIs there were very accepting of an anti-war message. So we produced other GIs, another underground newspaper called Fight Back, with emphasis on the letters FTA, which any GI could tell you stands for Free the Army, except it wasn't free, it was something else. It was very popular, and there was tremendous support for it among German students, among American students who were there in Heidelberg at the university town, and others. People from the States would come over and bring literature, and it was very, very good. At some point, however, there was a crackdown, and after a year, there was a crackdown. Me and several other GIs were immediately taken out of Germany. We hadn't done anything formally illegal, at least they never caught us at doing anything formally illegal. So no charges were pressed against us, but we were scattered. I wound up at a small base in rural Louisiana. Others went to bases in Alaska to break up the movement. And so I did spend some more time in Louisiana, and I did get...
Before you go on there, I looked at your blog, and I saw a letter, article that one of the commandants was calling you a communist, and somebody else said that you ought to be killed.
Yes, yes.
What is your blog, by the way, so we can let others...
What is my what?
What's the address of your blog?
Oh, it's Andy Berman, one word, .blogspot, blogspot.com. And there I have quite a number of stories about these activities as well as other things. And it's fine, people want to look at it, get more information.
So then you're in North Carolina. I want to move the story along a little so we can get back to the new stuff.
Okay. So here I am out of the army. The Paris Peace Accord had been signed. The anti-war movement was a shadow of itself. The left was doing other things, all the other issues that came up, imperialist intervention in other places. And so I went back to school, studied in graduate school for a master's degree in engineering, and but also was involved in impeach Nixon stuff and things of that nature. Veterans for Peace itself was formally founded in 1985. I'm not sure exactly when I joined. There was a chapter in Chicago when I was going to the university, and I joined there. And it was a wonderful group of guys, many Vietnam vets. There was also a chapter of VVAW, Vietnam Veterans Against the War. We worked closely with them, demonstrations, commemorations on Memorial Day, on Veterans Day. One thing that I really enjoyed was there was an annual stand down, which is a day that the Veterans Administration would allow any veteran to come to the armory, get a physical checkup, get a dental checkup, speak to a lawyer about any legal issues, get food stamps, whatever needs they wanted. And VVAW and Vets for Peace were in charge of the kitchen. So we would boil up 500 hot dogs, salads, all sorts of wonderful delights for the veterans that were coming. It was really very satisfying. But also we were involved in political protests against U.S. intervention everywhere. So I had been a member, or I was a member of Veterans for Peace for over 25 years. At some point, I had to leave Chicago. I got diagnosed with something called chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which is something you get from Agent Orange, but I hadn't been a GI in Vietnam, so I couldn't claim it as caused by military service. But in any case, the Veterans Administration was perfectly willing to take on my care, and they have, and they still do it to this day. And they've done a wonderful job. As you can see, I'm alive and well after many years of having this blood cancer. So that's how I got involved with Veterans for Peace. Now, when I moved to Minneapolis, I immediately looked up the Veterans for Peace chapter, and I joined it here. And it wasn't quite as friendly, I thought, as the one in Chicago, but they were not really nice folks, and we did a lot of things. Demonstrations, protests, social gatherings, what have you.
So when did problems start?
That's a good question. Problems began in earnest when the conflict in Syria broke out, when this fascist dictator, Bashar al-Assad, was suppressing a popular uprising with poison gas against his own people, dropping things called barrel bombs on housing, which would bury children alive, literally bury them alive in the rubble of their houses, an absolute horror. And the vice president of Veterans for Peace, Condon at the time, joined a delegation of a group called the U.S. Peace Council, which is really a terrible name because they were aligned with Assad as well. Their argument was the U.S. is the cause of all these issues, of all the troubles, and the U.S. was opposed to Assad, so Assad must be good. And they backed Assad, and I spoke out against it. And there was a group in Minneapolis of Syrian Americans and their supporters that was called CISPOS, CISPOS. That was in honor of CISPES, Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. We called ourselves the Committee in Solidarity with the People of Syria.
Right.
And we were very active in support of Syria, and the Syrian American community here was with us all the way. And there is Jerry Condon, who is literally the vice president, later the president of Veterans for Peace, pushing the line of support for Assad as an anti-imperialist. Now, in the publications of Veterans for Peace, in particular, an online blog or an online, but a place where Veterans for Peace members could write their opinions, I spoke out against Assad. And I argued for supporting the rebellion against him, the democratic rebellion against him. That earned the ire of Jerry Condon. Now, Jerry, as I've written in my blog, was, in my opinion, a heroic Vietnam War resistor. He had been in the Special Forces, Green Berets, and he refused to go to Vietnam. He was marshaled, jailed. He somehow escaped, spent at least 15 years in exile in Canada and Sweden before amnesty came under Jimmy Carter and he was allowed to come back to the US, I'm sure with bad discharge papers. But he had every right to be very angry at the US government. Unfortunately, from that anger perhaps, he adopted this infantile view, which unfortunately is popular in some elements of the US left, that the United States is the cause of all the evil that happen in this world, no matter what situation heck has. If the US is taking one position, you take the other side. Well, since we were on diametrically opposed positions, we fought it out, but it was fought out on this internal blog of Veterans for Peace. But he got extremely angry at me. I always tried to be very civil, recognizing that he had gone through some hell, 15 years in exile, away from family and friends, because of his courageous stand against the war in Vietnam. He continually targeted me, and at one point, he blocked me. He had the authority to block me from posting to this internal group. In any case, more recently, with the developments going on in Ukraine, again, complete him and unfortunately much of the board of directors adopting the position that it was US and NATO were the cause of the war. And that the excuses that Putin was making, that we in Russia have legitimate security interests, that NATO has been coming to our borders, were the line that Jerry Condon and others, unfortunately, in the board of directors have taken. And the war of words, again, on this internal website, became very, very heated. Again, always polite. I got some horrible personal slander at me, anti-Semitic crap, vicious, I'm a CIA agent, reporting to the US government, and nothing was done about that. And finally, recently, an unfortunate incident where Medea Benjamin, who is promoting essentially the view that there needs to be a ceasefire that leaves the Russian troops in place and stops the resistance of the Ukrainian people, and then we'll talk. Well, I consider that to be surrender, asking them to surrender, stop resisting, but offer them nothing. And there was, when Medea Benjamin came to Minneapolis to speak, we called a demonstration. We got half a dozen people out there with our slogans, our placards. And when she came, we shouted our slogans and sang some songs. Unfortunately, some super militants of an anarchist tendency showed up and got into a fight, literally a couple of blows, a couple of punches. And it was broken up immediately. The police came, the police stayed there for a few hours, and that was the end of it. But they tried to tie it to me. Now, I was there. I wasn't involved at all with the fight. I have a daughter with a disability. And so when the fighting happened, which lasted no more than 2 minutes, I would say, I took my daughter far away from it. So I was nowhere near the fighting, nowhere. But I strongly suspect that it was tied to me somehow because I was physically there with the people holding placards.
Well, let me break in here. Were you claiming that your demonstration was a Veterans for Peace demonstration?
Interesting. There were two of us, two members of Veterans for Peace.
Uh-huh.
The other fellow I was with wore such a hat, and he was in violation of that edict that you cannot go to a demonstration that is against the political line of the board of directors. And I just wore a little hat with a Ukraine flag. So I wasn't in violation of that at all. But I was never asked to talk about the charges that were made against me. As I think I sent you the letter telling me I'm expelled. I was not informed that I was under investigation. I was not informed that there was going to be a vote in the board of directors on expelling me. I was not informed at all. I was expelled. And then I was said, if I wish to appeal it, I can come to a meeting on such and such a date. Well, as I said in my letter, the fix was in. The decision had been made to expel me. After the fact, to say I could appeal without having been even informed or asked to defend myself prior to expulsion, there was no point. The decision was made. The board of directors is strongly now following this party line on Ukraine. And so I didn't see any reason, or I told them I will not be defending myself after the fact.
Who is the head of things now? Is Jerry Condon still the?
No, Jerry Condon, he's on the board of directors and some others. Actually, this is another story. The president of the board of directors is Susan Schnell. Susan Schnell was a nurse in the Navy who at one point was an anti-war activist while she was a nurse in the Navy. And she was in a small airplane that flew over military bases in the Bay Area, dropping anti-war leaflets. So she got into trouble big time. She was court-martialed. I don't know why she turned into a supporter of the Putin line on Ukraine. I don't know what happened after that. But as I wrote to her, I heard about her dropping the leaflets on the shortwave radio when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Togo, Africa. And I was inspired by it. I was inspired. I was teaching math. I stopped teaching math for an hour, and I made my class, Togolese students, into a discussion about the war in Vietnam. But for some reason, she and others in the board of directors have essentially adopted the Putin line that the war in Ukraine was caused by NATO, and Russia is merely defending its vital interests.
Yeah, yeah. Now you, I guess, was this year you set up a kind of working group. I don't know if
yes.
Veterans
There
for
were
Peace.
2 members of the board of directors that I don't know how many members there are on the board of directors, maybe a dozen or so, but there were 2 members that had doubts, and one of them, in particular, was very much opposed to it, to the very supportive of Ukraine. He actually started a working group of members of Veterans of Peace who supported Ukraine. There was a group called the Russia Working Group that the board of directors had okayed. So we asked for a Ukraine working group. It was denied. So we were in the crazy position that Veterans for Peace had a Russia working group permitted, but a Ukraine group not permitted. So they outright banned us, said, no, you cannot call yourselves Veterans for Peace Ukraine working group, even though we had at that point a blog and let me show the flag.
Got it.
Got it?
Got it. Definitely. Thank you. Yep.
And they said they banned the flag. Said no. Well, at that point, Jeff and another fellow left the board of directors. I don't think he quit his membership. And other people, particularly a chapter of Veterans for Peace in Oregon, came out unanimously in support of Ukraine, opposing the banning of the Ukraine working group. As to my knowledge, no one else has been expelled. The fellow that was wearing the hat at the demonstration was suspended from the local chapter until the end of this year. But he's very angry and bitter, and I don't know what his future will be with the organization. But he was one of the founding members of the local chapter. So that's where it stands. I don't know of any effort to continue the fight within Veterans for Peace. On the other hand, I don't see much of organizing another organization or whatever against that position or in favor of Ukraine. There are a fair number of organizations. There are two major Ukraine solidarity organizations in the United States. And there's some terrific stuff going on abroad. And they have webinars and meetings, which I participate in. There's the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Network. There's the Ukraine Support Group. And then there's the European Network in Solidarity with Ukraine. And when you go on to they have webinars with Ukrainian speakers, and now can be heard by anyone on their webinars. They're giving voice to the Ukrainians. So that's where I've put my energies, in supporting those existing groups. I absolutely adore the European groups. It's amazing. They have their webinars in 3 languages. You look at the Zoom links and you see faces of people from 6 to 8 different European countries doing Ukraine solidarity work. And the only problem is the time zone. When they have their meetings, it's typically a very big 4 a.m. in the morning here, although occasionally they change it to evening meetings there so we can do it in the morning and participate. So there is good Ukrainian support work going on, and that's what I'm doing now. What happens in the future, I don't know.
And there's some interesting things or dates this month. On the 21st is the 10-year anniversary of the Ghouta sarin gas attack in Syria. And,
Yes.
and I believe the 24th is Ukraine Independence Day. So
Correct.
I think things are going to happen. I want to thank you so much for this interview. So interesting.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing to get the voice of truth out to the people.